And have the call the meeting to order and have the roll call.
Rotate on there.
Sorry, good afternoon, everyone. For roll call, Board Member Edmonds.
I am here.
Board Member Huber. Board Member Huber. Board Member Levier.
Here.
Board Member Long.
Here.
Board Member Parks.
Yes, here.
Thank you. Board Member Pollock. Absent. Board Member Ramirez.
I'm here.
Board Member Rollins.
Here.
Board Member Zaragoza.
Here.
And Chair Blatz.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, if everyone will rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And thank you, everyone. All right, minutes of the meeting of the Air Pollution Control District Board meeting held Tuesday, October 12th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
I'll move approval.
Huber, second.
Thank you. Board Member Edmonds.
Yes.
Board Member Huber.
Yes.
Board Member Levier.
Yes.
Board Member Long.
Yes.
Board Member Parks.
Yes.
Board Member Pollock. Is absent. Board Member Ramirez.
Yes.
Board Member Rollins.
Yes.
Board Member Zaragoza.
Yes.
Board Member Blatz.
Yes.
And thank you.
There we go. All right, next, the agenda review. Is there anyone who has any requests for changing the agenda, or do I have a motion to approve the agenda as is?
Chair Blatz, we do have an agenda review for item number 9, receive and file presentation from the California Air Resource Board staff regarding an overview of the commercial harbor craft regulation. A public comment letter has been submitted.
Okay, do we want to take that at the time of the item, or would we like to, do we need to bring that up now?
Just to inform you that a public comment was received as correspondence and we forward that to the board. And we just want to make sure the public is also aware of that. And we will have public comments during the item.
Perfect. Thank you, Mia. All right, with that, is there any requests for amending the agenda, or do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Second.
All right.
Rollins. Excuse me, was that Board Member Rollins who seconded the motion?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Board Member Edmonds.
Yes.
Board Member Huber.
Yes.
Board Member Levier.
Yes.
Board Member Long.
Yes.
Board Member Parks.
Yes.
Board Member Ramirez.
Yes.
Board Member Rollins.
Yes.
Board Member Zaragoza.
Yes.
And Chair Blatz.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, now number 6, public comment. This is a time set aside for citizens to make any comments they would like. Now, Mia, is this do we have a public comment, or is it going to wait for agenda item number 9?
We currently don't have any speakers signed up on Zoom for this item. We will for item 9. If you'd like, I can read our public comment into record. It's members of the public who wish to address the board today with live public comment on any agenda item will need to be connected via Zoom or telephone. Please visit ventura.org/COB/APCB for participation information and instructions. Requests to make live public comment on an agenda item will be accepted until the public comment period for each agenda item is complete. If you wish to make public comments, you must be connected to the meeting via Zoom or telephone prior to the close of the public comment period for that agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. And not hearing that there's any public comment, then I will close the public comment section and move on to number 7, which is board comments. Are there any comments from any of the board members?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Zaragoza.
Yeah, I just want to wish everybody a happy Veterans Day, and I hope that everybody celebrates Veterans Day, because all of us, I'm sure, have veterans in our families. And in fact, on my side, we start off with my dad being a Second World War veteran, and all the way down to Korea and Iraq, and my son was in the service too, and 2 nephews, and my grandson just got honorably discharged from the Navy. So salute to our veterans this coming Thursday.
Well stated, Mr. Zaragoza. I think everyone, I won't waste everyone's time saying the same thing over, but as a family who's my grandfather and a number of family members in the armed services, and November 11th is a very important day for a lot of service members. Supervisor Ramirez, I see you have a comment.
Thank you. Well, I'll agree with those comments about veterans, the veterans in my family, as well as all of you. But I wanted to mention the climate meetings in Glasgow and how it impacts us locally, that we need to do everything we can to deal with climate change, which includes clearing up our air, which is hurting people everywhere, including our own community. So what we're doing here is very important for people's health. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Edmonds?
Yes, I wanted to invite everyone to come on the 11th to Fillmore for our Veterans Day Parade. We've got our local car club will be driving the veterans, and the future farmers are having a breakfast for the veterans. So it should be a great parade. So come on out if you want to support veterans.
Thank you. Supervisor Parks?
Thank you. I know that the Santa Susana Field Lab just recently demolished a contaminated structure that they were required to do. How they demolished it is they put a bunch of explosives and blew it up with this huge, plume of smoke and dust, or, dust and dirt. And it's just for a project that they are so concentrated on protecting the public's health, supposedly, that they're being careful about the truck's tires when they come off site. Here you have just a total disregard for air quality, but also for the potential of having contaminants spread into the air. So I have asked, we've gotten some complaints on this, that we take a look at it, but it is just wanted to let you know, because it was pretty remarkable to see the callousness of how they took apart this building, and they should have dismantled it, not blown it up. So
May I ask who did that?
This is a part of the work that was being done, I believe, through...
It's Department of Energy supervisor. The buildings belong to the Department of Energy, but it's a Boeing facility. The real estate is being owned by them.
So we need to complain to our
This is the agency overseeing the whole process.
Right.
We are getting involved, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, Supervisor. And we'll be able to report to the board without findings.
Thank you.
That was that facility was a significant concern during the Thomas fire, and here we, maybe get away with it not being as worse a situation as it could have been, and then there they are exploding it later on, which seems counterintuitive, to especially if a lot of the public doesn't understand just how incredibly toxic that site is, and how bad the chemicals that were being used there were for decades, and that's really disappointing. But thank you, Supervisor Parks, for bringing it to our attention, and I hope that we'll do everything we can on the Air Pollution Control District of our limited jurisdiction to try and help on it. But man, that is not the way I think any of us would like to see the remediation happening up there. But it is good to at least see them getting rid of some of the bad stuff that's been there for a long time.
Thank you, Chair Blatz, for your understanding.
All right, are there any other comments from the board? Doesn't look like any, so I'm going to close board comments and move to the Air Pollution Control Officer. Lockie?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Chair Blatz and members of the board. I have a few items that I would like to share with the board. I did attend the CAPCOA board and membership meeting last week. And CAPCOA stands for the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association. And this took place in Sacramento. It was our first face-to-face meeting after the pandemic hit. So it was quite of a meeting. After such a long time, we discussed set of current affairs, air pollution-wise, and we had our counterparts from EPA Region 9 as well as CARB participating at the meeting. So it was quite informative. But one important development was there were elections held, and yours truly was nominated and elected to be the vice president of the association. And I was also elected to be the chair of the legislative committee. So it will keep me busy for the next year or so. And chances are I'm on the rotation now to be the president for next year if I'll last that long. Second one is I gave a presentation to the AWMA, the Air and Waste Management Association Channel Islands chapter, on our text alert system. It's attracting quite some interest. And quite interestingly, I was also contacted by the Ronald Reagan Library, and then they too wanted me to present on the text alert system, and I did so. I did visit the Simi Valley landfill again a couple of weeks ago to talk about their renewable methane project expansion. And I met with their executives as well as with Mr. Gideon Krakow, who happens to be an SCA, a South Coast AQMD board member, as well as a CARB board member. So he was very interested on those issues. Last but not least, we have hired a new addition to the family, Dr. Ebenwe, who's going to be our instrument specialist to join our monitoring division. And we're in the process of hiring a meteorologist as well. We are very happy about our prospects, and they'll be joining us probably in the next couple of months, by January 1st, by beginning of January. And again, as you know, we are involved in, we are attempting to install our electric charging stations. And just last week, I signed a contract with Edison, and we are hoping that the charging stations will be delivered and installed no later than beginning to mid of January in that time frame. And that concludes my remarks.
All right, thank you, Lockie. Are there any questions for the Air Pollution Control Officer? Not hearing any, then we can move on to our regular agenda. The first item is going to be a presentation, receive and file from the California Air Resources Board staff regarding an overview of the Commercial Harbor Craft Regulation. And I know we have a public comment on this. Whenever you think that's appropriate.
Sure. Yes, Chair Blatz and members of the board, as you may know, the Air Resources Board is working on an amendment to their Commercial Harbor Craft Regulation. It's a very important rulemaking. They are seeking to obtain significant emission reductions on criteria pollutants, diesel emission reductions, as well as greenhouse gases. And while it's a quite important rulemaking for many districts like ours who are in non-attainment, it's also attracting a fair amount of opposition from the impacted industry. Many of our local sectors have reached out to several of you, expressing their concerns about the proposed regulation. So I thought it would be quite useful to invite the Air Resources Board staff working on this particular regulation and give us a presentation and give us an opportunity to ask questions, I guess. And they very graciously agreed to our invitation. So we have Ms. Bonnie Soriano, who is the chief of Freight Activity Branch, accompanied by David Piros, who is the manager of the Freight Technology Activity Branch and Transportation and Toxics Division. And also, I believe we have their teammate, Anthony Poggi, also joining them. So they'll give a brief presentation, and after that, you can go ahead and ask whatever questions that you may have, and then we can go to the public comments subsequently. This is an informational item only. We don't need to vote on it. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Bonnie.
Great, thank you. I'm Bonnie Soriano. Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the board. So today we have the California Air Resources Board Commercial Harborcraft team and one of our Moyer team here today to provide an overview of our proposed amendments to the Commercial Harborcraft Regulation. But first, we'd like to thank you for inviting us to present to you. This proposed amendment is scheduled to be presented to the CARB board on November 19th of this year. It's the first of two board meetings. This is a two board meeting item, and the board will vote at the second board meeting, not at the first board meeting. And that second board meeting is likely to take place in February or March of 2022. And also, we had received a number of questions from your staff, I believe 6 or 7 questions that we plan to address at the end of the presentation, if that works for you. And the reason we decided to do it at the end is because we think that the information we provide in the overview will help us with the answers to those questions you provided. So next slide, please. So harborcraft operations are diverse. For this regulatory effort, we have broken the harborcraft large category into 18 separate vessel categories, and you'll see those well, we can talk about it if you want to see what the individual categories are. But these vessels are typically diesel fueled and can operate throughout the state. Activity can be concentrated near seaports, marinas, and harbors, and these emissions, while they're offshore, they're close to shore, and the impacts can be felt over 50 miles inland, as we saw in one of the studies that we published as part of our rulemaking package. The current commercial harborcraft regulation was adopted in 2008 with amendments in 2010, so this is not a new regulation. And because of that, regulation has reduced diesel particulate matter and other emissions in regions throughout the state. So the original regulation in the first set of amendments established requirements for vessel owners and operators to accelerate to Tier 2 or Tier 3. These are marine certified engines by the end of 2022 for the ferry, tugboat, excursion, crew and supply, barge, and dredge vessels. The original regulation and first set of amendments also requires that these vessels operate on ultra-low carb diesel, which is the same type of diesel that are used in on-road diesel vehicles. Next slide, please. This is a heat map that shows vessel activity that is happening along the entire coastline and the concentration of nearby sensitive receptors inland, and you can see those in the blue, and maybe the yellow don't show up as well, but in the blue. So many of these areas of high activity are often near disadvantaged communities and high population density that really surround many of these facilities and areas of high activity. The emissions from the vessels, as I said, travel onshore and impact sensitive receptors such as hospitals, elder care facilities, schools, and daycares, and impact the communities surrounding these areas of high activity And our health risk study, which I said was published as part of our rulemaking package, shows that these diesel PM emissions, which are toxic, cancer-causing particulate, can have cancer risk impacts as far as 50 miles inland. So next slide, please. So CARB staff recognizes the investments that owners and operators have made to comply with the current regulation. And we also would like to acknowledge the effort and incentives that local air districts, such as yourself, have provided to achieve additional emissions reductions. And as a result of these efforts, many engines now operate at Tier 2 marine levels. Nevertheless, a Tier 2 engine still emits approximately 162 times more. This is diesel PM emissions than an on-road, a 5-year-old school bus engine. And that's because the marine standards really lag far behind the on-road standards for similarly sized engines. Next slide, please, slide number 5. So this really is where I'm beginning to talk about what our proposal is. And so the proposal is based on a combination of zero emissions where feasible, and that we found for the short run ferries. Those are ferries that have essentially a 3-mile loop. And for new build excursion vessels that are required to have at least some partial zero emission operation. And for the other vessel categories, cleaner combustion is required. And in these categories, the proposal requires the cleanest US EPA certified engines available with the addition of a diesel particulate filter. And so in some cases, the cleanest certified engine will be a Tier 3 or a Tier 4, and it depends on the engine size. And that's why you'll hear me saying Tier 3 or Tier 4 kind of throughout the presentation. So with the cleanest combustion and diesel particulate filter, the PM standards required by the proposed amendments would harmonize with the newest on-road engine standards. And as of today, there are 22 models of Tier 4 marine engines certified, and DPFs are proven technology that have, as you're probably well aware of, been used in off-road and on-road vehicles for many years. So slide number 6. Slide number 6 is really the heart of what probably we'll talk about in some of the questions. And so this slide has a lot of information, but it shows essentially a high-level overview of the compliance dates for each vessel category and potential extensions that are available. And so I'll kind of walk through. On the left, you can see the different types of vessel categories. And then shown in green, depending on the vessel types, are the original compliance dates. And those are based on the engine tier level, the engine model year, and the category. And just to note that dirtier engines have the earliest compliance dates. And that was, we designed the proposed amendment so that we get the dirtiest engines first, so we can get the most emissions reductions early on. And so, as I said, the green arrows show the original compliance date. The regulation has a number of compliance extensions built in to provide flexibility for some of the owner operators that we'll talk about in a minute. And so these blue bars show those possible compliance extensions. And for most vessels, the compliance extensions that are shown here is for financial hardship and feasibility, where vessel replacement is likely the compliance mechanism, and that the owner operator can demonstrate that they have financial need for extensions. And so for many of these categories, there can be extensions granted up to 6 years for this financial feasibility, I'll call it, extension, with two exceptions. One is for the earliest compliance dates in 23 and 24. Those those categories can get up to 8 years of extensions, and that is due to economic considerations for passenger carrying vessels that have experienced ridership changes in 2020. And then the dark squares over on the right mark the dates that vessel replacement would be required after financial hardship and feasibility extensions may expire. And then we have a cap for those extensions. You'll see that dark line at 2034. And so all the extensions, well, that feasibility financial extension is capped at 2034. And as I mentioned, the compliance extensions provide opportunities for fleets dealing with technical feasibility that will likely require vessel replacement and demonstrated need for financial difficulties. And so as you can see in some of these categories, for the vessels qualifying for extensions might have up to 13 years from this year in order to comply with this regulation. So we'll come back to this slide when we answer questions, because I'm guessing there will be additional questions and some that you've already submitted in terms of what these implementation dates are. The next slide, please, talks about funding opportunities, and there are a number of incentive programs that are available to help pay for early compliance. And usually, as you know, that incentives generally don't pay for direct compliance, but usually require excess emissions or early. And one of the main programs that fund hovercraft engine replacement or repower is the Carl Moyer program. I'm thinking that many of you are familiar with the Carl Moyer program, and if not, we have one of our Carl Moyer team that can give you some background. And so probably many of our questions will center around the Carl Moyer program. It's a program that is administered by the local air districts to clean up certain categories of emission sources, and Carl Moyer does require surplus emissions that are in advance or additional to what compliance would require. I've also put a link here to a fact sheet that our team put together for these different incentive programs. So slide number 8. This shows the statewide emissions benefits, and I have some numbers for you for your area in just a minute too. And so you can see, because of the combination of the cleanest tiered engines and the diesel particulate filters, and in some cases zero emission, that we get really high reductions in diesel particulate matter, up to 89% reductions. And then for NOx, or oxides of nitrogen, 54% reductions. And so these are statewide numbers, and you can see that they're broken up into kind of the major categories of the fleets. And so I wanted to give you some numbers for your area. For the South Central Coast Air Basin, for NOx, 700 tons per year is the baseline for the aircraft, or 1.9 tons per day of NOx. And that reduces to 1 ton per day of NOx, and that's a 50% reduction in your area. And PM is 21.3 tons per year in the baseline. That's reduced. Let me just say that again. I may have flipped those numbers. 21.3 tons per year in the baseline and 2.8 tons per year in the control. And that's an 87% reduction. And so those are specific numbers to your region. So next, let's talk about the health benefits valuation. And so what we do as part of our rulemaking package is we look at, these are the non-cancer risk for premature mortality. And we look at statewide what the avoided premature deaths are, and hospital admissions, emergency room visits, and reduced cancer risk over the state to 22 million residents. And also we found that we did a very robust and comprehensive cost and economic analysis. And what this shows is that the cost of the regulation overall between 2023 and 2038, I believe it is $2 billion. And with the benefits associated to these avoided health outcomes is 5.25 billion. And so it's the benefits are significantly higher than the cost for this regulation. So next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. That was the last slide I just talked about. Next slide. Thank you. This is as part of our economic and cost evaluation. We look at the average cost to individuals, what that could be if the cost of compliance is passed on directly to the consumer. And this is from 2023 to 2038. And these estimates assume that there were no grants or incentives provided to the owner operators. So these are really conservative values for the cost to individuals. And then the last slide we have is the timeline and the next steps. And we have been in development of these amendments since 2018. Staff has held a robust public process with over 5 public workshops and 400 individual meetings with stakeholders, community groups, and industry. We've released quite a comprehensive regulatory package with all of our analyses. And in July, we released a very comprehensive standardized regulatory impact assessment. And for those of you that may not be aware of that, that's a requirement that we have for large regulations that looks at both cost, and it's a very cost and comprehensive cost and economic evaluation. In September, we released our notice and our package for our board hearing with our initial statement of reason and all of our inventory, cost, economic, feasibility studies. And then leading up to, that was start of our 45-day comment period, leading up to our first board hearing, which as I said, was November 19th of 2021. And then our second board hearing, this is one of 2 board hearings in likely February and March of 2022. And just to kind of clarify that the way our process works when we have 2 board hearings is the first is a presentation to the board, but the board doesn't vote until the second board hearing. And so the process would be adopted or voted on at the second board hearing. And so we have also provided in your packet a few additional slides that I'm not going to go over, but we may need them as answering some of the questions, but they're available to you if you'd like to look at them. And also, I'd just like to, again, thank you for inviting us to be part of this meeting, and we'll be happy to answer questions. What I was planning on doing at this time was starting out with the questions that were already submitted to us, if that's what you would like to do, or we can open it up to general questions, whichever works best for you. We're happy to do either way.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Bonnie, if you could go ahead and do the ones that you have questions on and answers first, I think that would be very beneficial. This is Supervisor Long. Thank you. Okay,
yeah, I think that'd be great. That would work very well. So let's go back and show the proposal compliance schedule, which I believe is slide 6. Yes, this one. So this really is the heart of the presentation, has a lot of information. And so the first question, I'll read the question and then we can walk through it. So the question is, when will charter fishing boats and work boats with tier 0, 1, and 2 engines no longer be eligible for incentives to upgrade through Carl Moyer program? So if you look at the slide, we're going to look at this first category, which is the pre-tier 1 and tier 1. So those are everything except fishing vessels. And so generally fishing vessels, we'll talk about it in a minute, but you can see them, they're down on the bottom row. So we're not talking about commercial fishing, but we are talking about commercial passenger fishing, which is a different category, also called sport fishing. And when you ask questions about whale watching in our language, those are excursion vessels. So I just want to make that clear too. And then work boats are shown down in this dredge, barge, crew and supply, and work boat. And so essentially for Carl Moyer, and that is the main incentive that we're talking about here. Vessels are no longer eligible for Carl Moyer once they reach their compliance date. And as I was mentioning before, incentives generally don't pay for compliance, but they can. But incentives can pay for early or extra, and in Carl Moyer, that's denoted as surplus emissions. And so generally, for these vessels, they're eligible for typically 3 years of surplus, and we have Anthony Poggi on the line, but for example purposes, I'm going to say 3 years of surplus emissions. So for direct compliance, the best time period for Carl Moyer would be no later than 3 years prior to the compliance date. And so for pre-tier 1, that would be pre-tier 1 and tier 1 that have compliance dates up to 2025. That would be 3 years in advance of that. For the research, sport fishing, and excursion vessels, those have compliance dates between 2026 and 2030, 3 years in advance of that. And then for the work boat, those are 28 to 31, typically 3 years in advance. If we're using 3 years as a surplus period, they can certainly have longer surplus periods, and some of that will be dependent on the cost effectiveness of the specific project. I know this is it's complex as we phase these in. And part of the reason we did phase in like this was to give vessel owners and operators plenty of advance notice so that they know that these requirements are coming. And so let's talk about this blue line a little bit, because I think we need to expand on this. And so in addition, the regulation provides this feasibility financial difficulty extension for vessels. And I talked about that earlier. And that's for vessels that need to be replaced for compliance and not repowered. I mean, many vessels can be repowered and have been repowered over the years using some of these Carl Moyer funds, but there will be some cases where the vessel will have to be replaced. And this is an extension that if the vessel needs to be replaced and the owner operator can demonstrate a financial need, that they can get up to 6 to 8 years of extensions, and that those are based on a 2-year increment. So they can apply for a 2-year extension and then apply for another 2-year extension with a cap of 6 to 8 years, or capped out to 2034, whichever comes first. And so let me give you a couple of examples, because I know this again can be complex because of the phase-in schedule. So for a tier 2 sport fishing vessel, its compliance date would be between 26 to 28. If you add a 2-year extension to that, that is 28 to 30. And then if you calculate backwards for 3 years for the surplus, so you're adding 2 years and subtracting 3 years, that gives you a Carl Moyer date of December 25 to December of 27. So I'm hoping that was clearer than what it might look like on paper. And then for a tier 2 workboat, so tier 2 workboat, you can see down is the 1, 2, 3, 4th line, where the dates for tier 2 would be in December 28 or 29. If you add a 2-year extension to that and then back calculate for 3 years of Carl Moyer surplus, that would be December 27 to December 28. And so essentially, you know, the eligibility for Moyer will depend on whether a vessel gets an its original compliance date, whether it gets an extension, and the cost effectiveness calculations that are part of Moyer. Okay, so let's go to the next. The next one is a little bit more straightforward. And this one is, when will commercial fishing boats with Tier 0, Tier 1, and Tier 2 engines no longer be eligible for incentives to upgrade through Carl Moyer program? So if you notice, the bottom line is commercial fishing. And commercial fishing is one category out of the 18 that has been handled a little bit differently. So commercial fishing vessels have a later extension or a later compliance date, although they don't have extensions. And those compliance dates are 2030 through 2032. And so for pre-Tier 1 or Tier 1 vessels, those are the dates that they would no longer be eligible for any incentives. And just to clarify, Tier 2 for commercial fishing vessels are fully compliant with the regulation. So it would just be the Tier 1 and pre-Tier 1 that would require that require upgrades to cleaner engines. So that's question number 2. Question number 3 is, Ventura has been giving grants to commercial fishing, charter fishing, excursion boat owners for many years. And we acknowledge that, and thank you for those efforts. If a charter fishing boat, so in this case, we're calling this a sport fishing vessel, was repowered to Tier 3 engine in 2021, when will that boat be required to repower with a Tier 4 engine? So if we look at the sport fishing, which is the third row down, a model year 2020 Tier 3 engine would have a compliance date of December 31st, 2030. And that's for a Tier 4 or Tier 3, depending on what is the highest certified engine for that category. And then it would have to have a DPF also, which wasn't really part of the question, but I just wanted to clarify it would be Tier 4 plus DPF. And so the compliance date would be 2030. If it received an extension, it could receive an extension because of this feasibility and financial difficulty out capped to December 2034. And that's the cap, the black line to the right. So that was question number 3. Question number 4, if the rule requires installation of a Tier 4 engine in a boat that is physically incapable of accepting a Tier 4 engine, what will the options be? And so I wanted to clarify that the requirement is typically a Tier 3 or Tier 4 plus a DPF. So that would be the requirement, repower to Tier 4 plus, or Tier 3 to plus a DPF. And so as we mentioned here, there are a number of compliance kind of pathways and extensions for qualifying vessels. First, there could be, if the vessel could not repower, then compliance would be a vessel replacement. And so the earliest and most direct would just be vessel replacement during the original compliance date shown in green, depending on the category and model year. However, the amendment, as I mentioned, contains a number of flexibility provisions, such as this financial and feasibility extension that I've been talking about, where the compliance date could be extended out either 6 or 8 years, capped to 2034. So that's one possible pathway. So that's 2, direct compliance, the financial feasibility. There are also, the regulation also has other extensions which have to do with feasibility and compliance options, such as a low use pathway for a tier 3 or a tier 4 engine that has reduced number of operating hours depending on how dirty the engine is. There's something else I was going to put in to that one. Oh, the one thing I did want to mention is that, you know, we talk about potential engine replacement or repower, and I just want to emphasize that the commercial harbor craft fleet in some cases is a fairly old fleet. So, for example, sport fishing vessels on average are 45 years old, with an average of a tier 2 vessel. And so in some of the farthest out compliance dates, you know, for example, 2034, that's going to mean that these vessels are 58 years old. And so we really, you know, while we acknowledge that some of the vessels will have to be replaced if they cannot be repowered, they're really nearing the end of their useful life and haven't had to, some of these categories have never had to replace or upgrade their engines. So I just wanted to make that point also. So that was number 4. Number 5 is somewhat similar. And it says, what if the Coast Guard will not certify tier 4 engines for certain vessels, either by class or individually due to safety concerns? And so again, just some clarification that in general, it would be a tier 4 plus a DPF. And tier 4 engines have been available since 2014 and have been inspected by the Coast Guard and have passed inspections. And so we don't think that, you know, there's going to be either a class that's going to not be certified. The Coast Guard doesn't certify engines, they inspect for safety. And so I'm just clarifying that. But, you know, there are going to be situations. Sorry, my dog has to be involved in every meeting I have, so you'll hear her in the background. She's going to start chasing squirrels here in just a minute. But, you know, there are going to be some reasons why a tier 4 and a DPF may not fit in a vessel. It might be too heavy for a vessel. The engine room might not be sufficient for the footprint of the certified and diesel particulate filters. So there will be some situations where it's not feasible to repower. And in that case, just like in the question number 4, there's going to be a feasibility demonstration, and there could either be direct compliance during these initial compliance dates, or for situations where the operator can demonstrate financial difficulty, they can receive those extensions. And this is very similar. It's the same as the last question, where there are other options. You know, there's extensions, there's low use options, and then there's this combination where you can upgrade the engine to a tier 3 or tier 4 without the DPF and have reduced number of hours. So the regulation does have a lot of flexibility that we have incorporated so that we can provide flexibility to the owners and operators. So we're on question number 6. And the question is, how many charter fishing, whale watching, and other passenger vessels will need to be replaced with new boats to comply with these regulations? How many of these are in Ventura County? How much will this cost local business? And so this is a place where one of the backup slides might be nice to see. If you can go down to the very last slide, which essentially is the inventory of the number of vessels per region. And so I don't know if you can advance the slides down to number 15.
Mia, could we advance the slides to number 15?
And this is one of your backup slides. So we provided some backup. So this shows you the South Central Coast. So I'll talk about these numbers first, and then we were able to pull out the Ventura numbers. But essentially, you can see for South Central Coast that for the passenger vessels, which would be the commercial passenger fishing, there are 41. The ferries are, you have 3 and 1, so that's 4. And then the excursion are the whale watching that you talk about are 12. And so that's for the South Central Coast. For Ventura only, those numbers are 4 ferries, 28 commercial passenger fishing, and 12 excursion. And so for vessel replacement, or for the cost evaluation, as I mentioned earlier, we did very extensive cost and economic evaluation. And because sport fishing vessels are going to tend to need to be replaced, we expect some of them will need to be replaced instead of repowered. We took a conservative approach for the passenger fishing vessels and assumed that the vessels that would not comply either by a low use or different pathway would need to be replaced. And so in this case, for Ventura only, and these are estimates that we estimate that 19 commercial passenger fishing vessels will need to be replaced. 1 ferry and 1 excursion vessel will need to be replaced. The rest will comply through different means. And that conservatively is a $61 million cost estimate. And so that's for Ventura. For South Central Coast, we have a little bit higher numbers for vessel replacement. 1 ferry, 28 commercial passenger fishing vessels, 1 excursion vessel at a total cost of about $80 million. And those are vessel replacement costs. They don't include resale of the vessel or some of the additional compliance costs. Those are straight vessel replacement costs. So those were, oh, nope, one more question. Those were kind of the technical questions that have to do with some of the numbers that we presented. So the final question is, the docket shows over 1,500 public comments, which I'm going to update that now to 2,400 public comments. The vast majority against regulating charter and sport fishing vessels. How does CARB intend to respond? And so, as I mentioned, as of just a little bit ago, there were 2,400 public comments to the docket. The docket closes on Monday the 15th. And these comments reflect both supporting letters. And for example, there were 3,400 letters submitted in support, but they were grouped into one submittal. So they don't really show the vastness of the support. And then a majority of those other 2,400 are in opposition, mainly from sport fishing industry. And so for the comments that are in support, many of those are pushing us to do more. We have a carve out for zero emission categories, but some of the environmental groups are pushing us to go to zero emission earlier in all categories. And then for the sport fishing, the comments are that the compliance costs are very high because as I mentioned, I'll just give a little bit of explanation with the sport fishing vessels. So the sport fishing vessels are handled similarly to 17 of the other categories. The difference with sport fishing is that they have very small engine rooms because they're optimized for passenger carrying. And so in some cases, the bigger footprint of the Tier 4 and DPF don't fit in the vessel. And because they are wood and fiberglass, they're a little bit more difficult to, for example, extend that engine compartment room. And so it's a little bit difficult for fitment of these newer engines and DPF. So that's kind of why sport fishing is a little bit different than some of the other categories that we think have higher feasibility to repower and retrofit. And so how do we intend to respond? And first of all, we just like to acknowledge that for the sport fishing vessels, many will require replacement to comply. And some of those owner operators are small businesses and may have high compliance costs. Also, we'd like to acknowledge that this is a fairly old fleet, and these vessels, the emissions are high. They impact nearshore and impact communities that are often disadvantaged around those communities. They have high emissions and contribute to cancer risk and non-cancer health impacts, such as cardiopulmonary mortality, hospitalizations, and respiratory illness. And I did pull out some of the health numbers just for your region, South Central Coast, and there are 28 avoided premature deaths. And that would roughly associate to about $280 million in health benefits if you evaluated those health benefits. And so really, I think what we want to emphasize is that emission reductions from all categories are critical to meeting our emissions reduction goals. Our board directed us both in 2017 and 2018 to achieve further reductions because of many of these communities surrounding these areas of high activity are disadvantaged, and high concentration of sensitive receptors that you saw earlier, and population density. We have worked hard with industry, working, as I mentioned, 400 different individual meetings to provide flexibility. We have a number of extensions and low use compliance pathways. And for sport fishing and some of the other vessel categories that will need to be replaced, we've provided 6 to 8 years of possible compliance extensions. And as I mentioned, for some of those categories, they will have extensions out to 2034. And at that point, the vessel average age will be 53 years old. And so those vessels will be quite old with quite high emissions. And also, I wanted to continue our dialogue on Moyer and commit to continuing to work with the districts to provide incentives to repower or replace the vessels, and to provide these emissions reductions and public health benefits that are in surplus to what the compliance emissions reductions would be. And that was all of the 7 questions. And so at this point, maybe we could open up if you have other questions or comments, we could answer those now.
Okay, Ms. Edmonds?
Yes, where do individual yachts and personal smaller ocean vessels fit? And where are they in this paradigm?
So these are commercial hovercraft. And so generally the recreational vessels don't fit into this category. These are the commercial. Yachts, in certain cases where a yacht will become an excursion vessel, it will be considered as part of this regulation, but in general, the private use yachts are not included here.
Are the private use yachts and individual vessels also as high polluting, or have they been adjusted prior?
David, I'm gonna call on David Kuros to answer that question if he's on the line.
This is David Kuros. I'm here. That's a good question. And we've looked into the emissions, or at least tried to estimate what the emissions from recreational or personal use vessels are. Generally, the engines they emit about the same level as a commercial vessel per unit work produced. But those engines that are on commercial vessels tend to operate a lot more hours, so the emissions contribution is a lot higher. So under the complete hypothetical scenario that they were subject to the proposed amendments that we're going to be taking to our board next week, they would likely be able to fit in under some of the low use compliance options, and there wouldn't be any requirements to upgrade the engines. But that's hypothetical. There's no requirements on the recreational or private use vessels unless they're also engaged in commercial activity.
Okay, Supervisor Long.
Thank you. And David, I appreciate that comment. And Bonnie, thank you for answering all those questions. I'd asked for this to be on the agenda along with Supervisor LaVere. Fishing is an extremely important way of life to many of our community members for either food for their table or money for their businesses. And I had a question in regards to the smaller vessels. If that's the case, is it a size that makes them not within this regulation? Is it a 40-foot boat that the people are using to fish? You can tell by my terminology, I don't know fishing as well, but I'm getting a lot of questions from my fish and game commissioners and community members.
Yeah, I can start, and then David maybe can chime in on that. But this regulation is geared towards the commercial sector, and so it's not so much a size issue; it's more about whether it's in a commercial trade or not. And so, as you saw from that compliance chart, the fishing vessels are included; they're commercial. The commercial passenger fishing vessels are included; they're commercial. I mean, all of these are in a commercial trade, and so that's really the focus of this regulation. David, did I miss anything on that one?
There's two classes of sport fishing vessels that, at least the way we're understanding it, there's the so-called six-pack vessels or uninspected vessels that are engaged in commercial service. They can be a wide range of sizes, but they're only allowed to carry 6 passengers at a time. And then there's the larger inspected vessels. Both of them are regulated similarly under the proposed amendments.
Okay, and with that, on those 6-pack passengers that you're talking about, my understanding is on these new engines, there's also retrofitting and so forth. Is any of the Moyer grants going to be supportive of assisting in the payment of retrofitting as well? It seems like it's not just you swap out an engine. There's a lot more that goes along with this.
So the answer for Carl Moyer is Carl Moyer can pay for the repowering, the retrofitting, and replacement depending on the requirements under the grant and of what is available and what the vessel needs. So Carl Moyer can pay for retrofitting also.
Okay. And then we have quite a few things going out in and out of our area. And could you go to the heat map that you were showing?
Yeah, that is that's slide 3, I think.
I was wondering, how do you differentiate between our Navy base, our port freight vessels, and our sports fishing versus our smaller vessels?
Thank you. So this is based on AIS data. So that's the automatic information system data, but this is for sport. This is for commercial hovercraft, and so we pull out. We also work on the ocean-going vessel regulations in our branch, but this is for specifically for those commercial hovercraft where we have AIS data, and so this is only for those types of vessels.
Okay, because I'm just questioning, when you look at your cars, certain cars, they're exempt from like a smog. Are there any vessels that would be hitting these exemptions knowing that the life of the boat is going to be short? Are there any reprieves in those areas as they're going to go buy a new boat and so forth? Do we know? Have we looked into any of that? Just wanting to understand.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, I think that in certain cases, vessels that don't operate a lot of hours, there's low use exemptions and there's a reduced use compliance pathway. For vessels that are nearing the end of life, those could get extensions, you know, if they were going to stop operating after that. So I think that that's more of our inventory does look at all those different options, and we try to estimate to the best of our ability using the data that we have. And because we have a regulation in place now, we have a database from reporting from the original regulation. So we do have a lot of information about how much these vessels operate, what the size of them is. And so I think in our inventory, we've tried to be as very specific as possible to get to provide a realistic estimation of what the emissions impacts are and what the reductions will be. So I hope that answers your question, but if not, please clarify.
Yes. So then whose responsibility is to approve the waiver or the extension?
That will be a process that we have in the regulation. We have a process outlined, and so CARB will approve those based on the process that is will be included in the proposed regulation and hopefully adopted by the board.
So then will that be a local control?
That will be a state control, the Air Resources Board.
Okay. And then also I wanted to make sure, did you receive the Channel Islands sport fishing letter? I know they had some questions as well. We've received.
Bonnie, this is the letter that I forwarded to you yesterday afternoon.
Okay, yes. Yep, we received it.
Okay, is there any of those questions that you can respond to?
Let me pull that up. I think we may have responded to many of them in your 7 questions. I think they overlapped quite a bit.
I just wanted to make concern because I know our local community is watching today. We had this is an issue that was stated on the Pacific Business Times for Ventura and Camarillo, Ventura County and Santa Barbara County. We have many people that are very concerned on this. And I wanted to make sure that we have the opportunity to hear from you. It's really good to make sure that we have our stakeholders heard.
Let's see if we can pull that up.
Thank you.
So I think there are a couple things that I think there are some concerns in here about the timing. I think 2 main concerns here. One is the cost of replacing, because for sport fishing, as I mentioned, that replacement may be the main pathway to reaching compliance. And so I think one concern is the early compliance of those tier 0, pre-tier 1 and tier 1. And so those do have early compliance dates, but they also have 6 to 8 years of extensions based on, or 8 years worth of extensions based on the qualifying vessels that can demonstrate financial difficulty. And so I do believe that for the vessel operators that have financial difficulty, we have built-in flexibility to address those really early implementation dates. The other I think one of the misconceptions is that this regulation goes into effect in 2023, and that because of that, everything has to be replaced in 2023. And as you saw from that, from our implementation date schedule, there's a long phase-in based on the type of vessel and the model year, and that, phase-in might be as late as 2034. And so we have tried to give the owner operators a long lead time so that they know that this is coming and they can start passing on those costs to consumers so that they can fund, whatever their compliance costs are going to be. The other thing I did want to mention, which we didn't really mention because we kind of had a shorter slide deck for this, is that we are working with some of the engine makers that make the off-road engines. And those off-road engines, as I mentioned, they have better emissions profiles. Some of them have the DPF already built into the package. They have a smaller footprint. And in fact, we're working with one company that's going to take an off-road engine and marinize it. So it would be a marine engine, which will have a smaller footprint. And so we really think that the engine makers are going to respond to the requirements of this regulation. It does tend, some of our CARB regulations tend to be technology forcing. And we're seeing engine makers that are going to respond and build the smaller footprint engines that could be repowered into some of these vessels. And so we think that lead time is going to provide that opportunity for engine makers to come in, and we're seeing that happen already. So I think we've taken a very conservative approach, assuming that vessel replacement is going to be needed, but we're optimistic that there's going to be some abilities for repowering as the engine makers respond.
And if you're saying that it's a financial difficulty, what is the income that they have to have?
David, can you respond to that question?
The proposed regulatory text does not have any set criteria, and we recognize that there's a lot of case-by-case needs. The reg text does say that income, profit, and loss statements, as well as tax returns, would need to be submitted. And then if, say, extensions are granted for a period of 6 to 8 years, or you're looking for the last 2-year extension, there's also other criteria that need to be demonstrated, like efforts made to adjust ticket prices in order to accrue enough funds for a down payment. So there's not a specific income level, as we recognize the finances of every company needs to be considered on a case-by-case basis.
And for the smaller vessels?
The same requirements would apply for smaller vessels or larger vessels if they're subject to the proposed amendments for the harbor craft regulation.
Okay, thank you. And Bonnie, was that all the other questions on the sports fishing letter?
Let me go back and look at it real quick.
Maybe I can assist.
That would be helpful.
Rather than having Bonnie, go through the pages.
Thank you so much.
Perhaps you can clarify the issue that was brought up in the letter about the safety issue. I guess the concern was that many of the operators may be pushed towards engines, technologies that are not yet proven or safe enough. And I know you alluded to it in your presentation. If you don't mind elaborating on that, clarify that for us.
Right. I think there are two issues. One is a fitment, and the feasibility of being able to put engines or DPFs that don't fit and that are heavy, and in those cases that they can demonstrate infeasibility of being able to repower a vessel. And so that I think is pretty straightforward. I think the issue probably that they're bringing up is that there's some perception that the engines and the diesel particulate filters increase the temperature in the engine room. And while the DPFs are another piece of equipment, they don't increase the temperature in the engine room. So they don't operate at any higher temperature than a diesel engine would. The Tier 4 engines and Tier 3 engines, they've been put in vessels already. They're already proven to be safe. They don't increase the temperature. And so we don't quite understand we don't have the data showing us that there is an increase in the temperature profile that the vessel operators are discussing. There are going to be cases where the engines are too heavy, they're going to not fit, they're not going to, be stable enough. And in those cases, they can demonstrate in feasibility. And so, David, I know that as the technical folks, David might have some more information to answer that question.
Nothing to add unless there's further questions.
All right. Supervisor Long, did you have anything else?
I just wanted to say thank you, Bonnie, for addressing all those items. I know there are some public speakers, but it's really an important issue for our community to understand this and work with CARB. So appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting us too. We do appreciate that.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Ms. Edmonds?
Yes. According to this map, it's 2017, and I just wanted to very quick answer. It has the path or the volume of vehicles increased or lessened since 2017. Do you know?
That's a very good question as of what happened in 2020. I mean, the reason we're using 2017 is because we have a full set of AIS data for that. I think in some cases, the ridership has decreased. So in some cases that the number of vessel counts is probably lower, but we also know that in some cases, like tugs and the vessels that are responding to some of the increased container cargo have increased. So it's hard to say what 2021 may look like, but I'd say on the whole, this probably is a good representation of activity, although it might not be exactly precise.
Thank you.
All right, Supervisor Parks.
I just wanted to comment that this is a lot more in the weeds than I thought we were going to get. We have a Board of Supervisors meeting agenda item at 3:00 in 4 minutes or so, and we have dozens of people waiting to testify. So just want to put that out there that we need to move a little faster, and knowing that we'll have this back before us, I think we can get into more of the weeds then too.
Thank you. Supervisor Levere.
Yeah, just real quick, and I thank you for being here, Bonnie. I have the Ventura Harbor in my district, so obviously there's some concern with the sports fishermen and the whale watchers and the excursion trips to the islands. The one question I had was, you had the slide about the cost increases per person based on the various types of activity. And did those rates assume vessel replacement?
So for the sport fishing, those were conservative, and they did assume that for sport fishing, the vessels that would need to be upgraded would be replaced. And so it's a conservative estimate.
Thank you.
All right, I only have one quick question. Are other states doing anything similar?
That's a good question. We know that up and down the coast that areas such as Washington have had pretty aggressive programs to reduce emissions from harbor crafts. In a lot of cases, ferries, because there are so many ferries that operate in different regions. What we've heard, interestingly enough, is that on the East Coast, vessels tend to be newer because of hurricanes. And so while I don't know if they have I do know there are some specific regions, because of sensitivity, do have programs. But I think as a state, probably this is one of the most comprehensive programs.
Thank you. All right, I know we have a public comment. So Mia, if you would address the public comment now, I think, unless there's any other questions. I'm sorry, Supervisor Ramirez, did you have a question?
I'm going to just withhold comment. I am concerned about all of the things, but thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Blatz. This is just a reminder for members of the public. We are on Air Pollution Control Board meeting item number 9. If you wish to make a public comment on this agenda item for Air Pollution Control Board meeting, please press the raise hand button now, or if you are calling in today, please press *9 now to be added to the speaker queue. We do have a few speakers signed up. I don't see all of them on our queue, so I'm going to start with Frank Ursidi. Mr. Ursidi?
Oops. How about now? You guys hear me now? Let's see if I can get my...
We can hear you. Please proceed.
I'm trying to get my notes up, so if you can, all of a sudden we entered into a large screen. Stand by.
We can hear you, Mr. Ursidi.
Why don't we move on to the next speaker for a minute while I get my notes back, please?
Sure. One moment, please. Our next speaker is going to be Jamie Dimon.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Dimond. My husband, Captain Jason, and I are on the board of directors for the Sport Fishing Association of California. Jason and I, along with our 3 young children, own 2 sport fishing vessels, which have been operating out of Santa Barbara since 1996. We run day fishing trips March through December. We partner with UCSB, NOAA, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and others for collaborative fisheries research projects. And one can say most important, we partner with the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum, facilitating floating marine labs to Santa Barbara County Title I school 3rd and 4th grade students, providing the majority of them with their first ocean interaction. The proposed CARB regulations as is will have a drastic negative impact on our business and our communities. My husband has been a fisherman for 40 years. We know our communities. We act as stewards of the land and water, not only for our own benefit, but for the benefit of future generations. We make this active choice to bear much of the cost and responsibility protecting our natural resources. We value the importance of air quality. We also believe in the 3 pillars of sustainability: economic viability, environmental protection, and social equity. As the rule stands, it is not a sustainable option for our industry. It is not equitable for CPFB operators or the people they serve. I'm concerned with the proposed amendments to the Harborcraft Rule. Under the amended rule, beginning January 21, 2023, commercial passenger vessels like mine will be required to replace engines with cleaner tiered engines and equipment, among other requirements. At first, that sounds pretty good. Unfortunately, the proposed rule was rushed without truly fleshing out the rippling consequences. To start, we will be removed from our long-standing designation as commercial fishing vessels, despite the fact that we are recognized as such by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We are commercial fishing vessels who also carry passengers. We have to buy the same license, we have the same class of boats, same engines, and our businesses have similar profit margins. We, the small passenger vessels, are ocean access for mid to low income and disadvantaged communities, those who cannot afford the luxury of owning their own private boat. We are the means by which our local communities can see and visit the Channel Islands, go fishing and whale watching, experience the beauty of our coastline and local sea life. We would have to increase our rates, becoming an elitist activity. Researchers and nonprofits would no longer be able to afford the cost, denying best available science and putting an end to life-changing experiences for our local school kids. The lack of communication between CARB and Coast Guard is unacceptable. We cannot change anything on our vessels without their approval. Therefore, we cannot put in engines or other equipment without their oversight for safety, as we are passenger-carrying vessels. I'm sure you can appreciate my concern here after the Conception disaster. Tier 3 or 4 plus DPF is just not possible. The added weight of components will not fit, and it will affect stability of the vessels. It will also change our passenger capacity due to added weight, further increasing the cost to the public. CARB has stated they are aware and said we'll just have to replace all 174 CPFBs in the fleet with steel vessels. Why? Because proposed equipment runs so hot it isn't safe for use in water fiberglass vessels, and the expansion and contraction will break the welds on aluminum boats as well. The diesel particulate filters they want us to use are notorious for clogging. For a truck, it's most likely no big deal. Pull over, get out, and wait for a tow. If that were to happen on a passenger vessel, it would leave us dead in the water. What if that happened mid-channel with weather picking up or touring the Painted Cave, entering or exiting the Ventura Harbor? Even worse, when these filters clog and the engine does not automatically shut off, they overheat, catch fire, and in some cases explode. This has the potential to make the conception incident seem commonplace. There is a clear lack of communication between CARB and local APCDs. Local APCD CARB Moyer grant programs have very different structures for financing, contract length, and how many components can be funded at one time. Santa Barbara, for example, will only pay out $250,000, or 80%, whichever is less. The cost associated with upgrading to Tier 3 or 4 plus DPF is an extreme economic hardship for our small business, especially since once this becomes a rule, we will no longer qualify for CARB Moyer grant funding. We're also concerned about the equipment availability. Tier 3 and 4 plus DPF is not available in a model small enough to fit our vessels, meaning horsepower under 800. I ask you to support CPFVs. Let us continue to be considered a commercial fishing vessel and receive access to grant funding, same compliance deadlines as commercial fishing vessels, and be returned to our former classification as such. We are 100% behind cleaner air and healthier communities, but it's being rushed to the detriment of those who are the backbone of these coastal communities. Most of us live where we work and want the best for our environment. However, it must be done thoughtfully, truly working with stakeholders, using common sense and not causing more harm than good. Frankly, to push this type of action through during a global pandemic with businesses on the brink, people's lives and livelihoods hanging in the balance is unconscionable. I'd also like to comment on some of the things that were said today.
Hi, I'm sorry, your
Vessel
5 minutes
age is. I wish I had equitable time to respond as CARB had to present. No one could talk fast enough to respond to all that was said today. Vessel age is not indicative of seaworthiness. To comply with extension request requirements, it will cost between $60,000 and $100,000 for the naval architect and financial feasibility reports for each extension request. There's way too much for me to unpack in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Diamond. All right, Mia, do we have any other speakers?
Yeah, our next speaker is going to be David Goodman. Mr. Goodman.
Hi, thank you very much. My name's Dave Goodman. I'm a lifelong resident of Oxnard. I currently serve on the Ventura County Fish and Game Commission. I was originally appointed by the mayor of Oxnard. He's now the mayor, and I was reappointed by Supervisor Ramirez. And I thank you both for the opportunity to serve. I'm not going to take a lot of time. I'm very concerned about this regulation as it pertains to the sport fishing industry. And I want to tell you why I'm concerned about that. When Bonnie did her presentation, she glossed over a figure that I think is really the elephant in the room for the industry. And that is for our local fleet to replace the boats that they estimate need to be replaced is a dollar figure of $61 million. The fact of the matter is that each and every one of the boats that operate in the fleet in Ventura County are family-owned boats. They're not corporate-owned boats. This represents a tremendous financial burden and will likely put the majority of these operators out of business. Many of them already have mortgages on their vessels, which they will have to replace, and those vessels will be worthless, but the owners will still have the financial obligation to pay for those boats. This regulation will put operators out of business. Now, my real concern here has to do with the effect on the marginalized members of the community. I'm a retired police officer. When I was a young police officer in the 80s, I worked part-time at juvenile hall to earn extra money. And I made it a point to build a rapport with these kids that were at risk. And one of the kids that really comes to mind when talking about this issue, we'll call him Jake. He was a young man who, when he was 14 or 15 years old, he was in custody for some serious crimes. And in talking to him in his history, his father had been killed in a shootout with the police. He's a resident of Port Hueneme. And as I built a rapport with this young man and tried to get him to think in terms of what he wanted to do with his life besides be in jail, he told me that he had been to the beach and he had been out on a boat and he wanted to be a marine biologist. And that was the real dream that he had, but he felt it was unachievable because of his current situation. And the fact of the matter is, if these regulations are implemented as written, there's going to be a whole lot of Jakes that are going to be in the system and unable to participate in what our resources we have here. And that's a tragedy. Don't let this happen. I yield my time. Thank you.
I would just like to appeal, if I can, for the fact that we have dozen or 2 dozen people waiting for our redistricting hearing on remapping and all. And I understand there's also a standing committee meeting. Is there a way that we could continue this to, for example, our meeting's at 3, maybe we'll be done by 4:30, and then we have another meeting at 6, so maybe continue it till 5 o'clock, for example. But it is going to impact a lot of people. We doing 2 minutes or 3 minutes for public comment. I'm just sorry that we have this conflict going on right now in terms of 2 important meetings that are going on at the same time.
I understand. Lockie, is there anything that's imperative today? Well, first of all, I think now we have public comment up, and I think we have to continue to take public comment if there are any other public comments. I don't think we can close that right now. Mia, are there any other public comments?
We do have a couple of other speakers. Our agenda does say that it's 5 minutes total per person. I'll defer to our county staff, Jacqueline Smith, if that can be changed at this time.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I would advise that this item that the board conclude this item, that the same amount of time be given to all public speakers, which has already been provided, but that if the board wants to continue the remainder of the items on the agenda to later in the afternoon, it certainly may do so.
Thank you. I'd really appreciate that. I mean, I have council members who have council meetings this evening and they need to testify before the meetings. It's just like so many things are piled up on having our board meeting start at 3 o'clock, which it hasn't. So thank you for understanding.
Yeah, I personally don't know if I can reconvene the meeting any later today, but whatever. Lockie, is there anything that's imperative that we get done today? It doesn't look like it, but I know we have a 30-day authorization for teleconferencing. Is that mandatory that we get that today, or can we?
That's the one critical item, but I'll defer to Jacqueline. Jacqueline, can you see a way out?
I think that item should be heard by the board today. If the board wants to continue the remainder of the items to a different meeting, it may do so if there's no objection from the district.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's totally doable, but we'll have to take the resolution, adoption of the resolution for the 30-day for the public meeting.
Jacqueline, do I need to vote on suspending the current meeting and postponing the other agenda items except for number 10 to another meeting, or can we just do that on my own order?
I think I would suggest that the board vote on that. I'm not sure of the answer, but
I move that we postpone the remaining items except for 10 to another meeting. We continue this particular item, number 9, that is the end of the presentation, including opening public speaking, a public comment section up for 5 minutes each at a subsequent meeting, either at our next meeting or it'll be at a special meeting if we decide to set a different date. Do I have a second?
I second that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, was it Board Member Edmonds who seconded that motion, Chair Blatz?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Go ahead and have a vote.
Board Member Edmonds.
Yes.
Board Member Huber.
Yes.
Board Member Levere.
Yes.
Board Member Long.
Yes.
Board Member Parks.
Yes.
Board Member Ramirez.
Yes.
Board Member Rollins. Board Member Rollins.
Yes.
Board Member Zaragoza.
Yes.
And Chair Blatz, were you going to continue this to a time certain date, or?
We're gonna.
No?
I think we'll decide that. I mean, I
Okay.
I think the next meeting will be most likely, but if we have a special meeting, we can.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Then I'm going to move to number 10, adoption of a resolution authorizing remote teleconference meetings of the Air Pollution Control Board for a 30-day period. Are there any questions? I doubt it. I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to approve.
Huber, second.
Huber, seconds. And we go ahead and have a vote.
Board Member Evans?
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Huber?
Yes.
Board Member Levere?
Yes.
Board Member Long?
No.
Board Member Parks?
Yes.
Board Member Ramirez?
Yes.
Board Member Rollins?
Yes.
Board Member Zaragoza?
Yes.
Chair Blatz?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. We will let everyone know when our next meeting will be via email and make sure it is timely noticed. And good luck to the supervisors. Oh, Supervisor Parks, you had to jump in.
Thank you so much for that. And I really apologize to the speakers. The question I have is, you have a standing committee. Is that also continued?
Yeah, we're going to have to continue that, or we're going to have two supervisors in there. And Lockie, do we have anything that is imperative? I don't think we do on the standing committee that has to get done today.
No, we do have a resolution for the continuation of the remote meetings, but we'll figure it out.
Well, I apologize to interrupt, but I do think the standing committee briefly needs to convene today to continue that standing committee meeting.
Okay. All right. Well, all right then. Everyone else is adjourned. Standing committee members, please log into your standing committee link as soon as possible. Supervisor Ramirez? Oh, I think she's okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Meeting is adjourned.